The Galactic Council believed Earth would finally kneel. Their fleets surrounded humanity. Their demand echoed across every channel: pay tribute or be punished. But humanity didn't hesitate, not for a second. Our leaders responded with a single word. A word that froze the council chambers and sent a shiver through every empire listening. And in that moment, the galaxy realized humanity would never bow. And they had just made the worst mistake possible. The detection arrays picked it up first. A gravitational distortion near Jupiter's orbit. Then another near Mars. Within minutes, every telescope on Earth and every satellite in orbit turned toward the same impossible sight. Ships were appearing out of nowhere, materializing from some form of faster-than-light travel that humanity had only theorized about in science fiction novels. The vessels were colossal, each one dwarfing the International Space Station by a factor of hundreds. Their hulls gleamed with a metallic sheen that seemed to shift colors, reflecting light in ways that hurt to look at directly. There were 12 of them in total, arranging themselves in a perfect geometric pattern around Earth. The largest hung directly over the Pacific Ocean, casting a shadow that could be seen from the ground even through cloud cover. Dr. Sarah Chin stood in the control room of the Global Defense Initiative headquarters in Colorado, watching the feeds from multiple sources. She was the director of Earth's Unified Space Monitoring Program, a position that had seemed almost ceremonial until 3 hours ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she zoomed in on the lead vessel. She had spent her entire career studying the possibility of first contact. She had written protocols, run simulations, and prepared humanity for this moment. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The communication came through simultaneously. On every frequency humanity used: radio, satellite, internet, even old television broadcasts. The signal overrode everything, displaying the same image on every screen across the planet. The being that appeared was tall and slender, with skin that looked like polished obsidian. Its eyes were large and golden, with vertical pupils that contracted as it began to speak. When it did, the words came through in perfect English. Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and every other major language on Earth. Each person hearing it in their native tongue. People of Earth, I am Overlord Cassix of the Sovereign Collective. We have governed this galaxy for 23,000 of your years. We maintain order among 6,000 civilized worlds. Your species has reached the threshold of interstellar awareness, and therefore you now fall under our jurisdiction. The being's voice was neither hostile nor friendly, merely matter-of-fact, as if explaining basic mathematics to a child. You will provide tribute to the collective. Each year, you will deliver 30% of your refined metals, 20% of your agricultural output, and 5,000 of your citizens for service in our labor corps. In exchange, we will not destroy your civilization. You have 72 hours to signal your acceptance. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun. For several seconds, there was absolute silence in the command center. Then every phone, every radio, every communication device began ringing at once. Sarah looked at her second-in-command, Commander Marcus Webb, a former Air Force pilot who had seen combat in 3 different conflicts. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with determination. "Get me a line to Geneva," Sarah said quietly. "The Security Council needs to convene immediately." Within an hour, representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in the emergency chamber beneath the United Nations building. The room had been designed decades ago to withstand nuclear war. Now it served as the meeting place for humanity's response to an even greater threat. President Elena Volkov of the European Federation stood at the central podium. She was a former diplomat who had negotiated peace treaties in regions that had been at war for generations. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her blue eyes scanned the room with careful assessment. "We've analyzed their ships," she began without preamble. "Our best estimates suggest each vessel carries enough firepower to level a continent. Together, they could render our planet uninhabitable within days. We have no weapons that can penetrate their shields, no defenses that can stop their weapons. From a purely military standpoint, resistance appears futile. Chancellor David Okafor of the African Union stood up from his seat. He was a broad-shouldered man who had once served as a peacekeeper in conflict zones before entering politics. Are you suggesting we surrender? That we simply hand over our people and our resources to these invaders? I'm suggesting we consider all options, Alina replied carefully. We have 72 hours. Let's use them wisely. For the next 6 hours, the council debated. Some argued for immediate surrender, citing the technological gap and the certainty of destruction if they refused. Others demanded resistance, insisting that slavery by another name was still slavery. A few suggested attempting negotiation, trying to buy time or reduce the tribute demands. The arguments grew heated, voices rising as the weight of the decision pressed down on everyone present. Then the door to the chamber opened. A woman walked in, flanked by 2 security officers. She was perhaps 50 years old, with dark skin and gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore the uniform of the Global Defense Initiative, but with insignia that most of the council members didn't recognize. Sarah Chen stood up from her seat near the back of the room, her eyes widening in surprise. Director Park, Sarah said. I didn't know you were still active. Director Yuna Park had been Sarah's predecessor, the woman who had founded the space monitoring program 30 years earlier. She had officially retired 5 years ago, or so everyone believed. Now, she stood before the council with the bearing of someone who had never stopped working. Forgive the interruption, Madam President, Yuna said, addressing Alina directly. But there are things this council needs to know before making any decision. Things that have been kept secret for very good reasons, but which can no longer remain hidden. Elena gestured for her to continue. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the mysterious director. 30 years ago, we detected the first probe from the Sovereign Collective, Yuna began. It was small, unmanned, conducting a survey of our solar system. We captured it, studied it, and learned 2 important things. First, that we were not alone in the universe. Second, that whoever built that probe would eventually come for us, and they would not come as friends. She pulled out a small device and activated it. A holographic display appeared above the council table, showing images of massive installations hidden in asteroid fields beneath the surface of the moon, and in the deep ocean trenches of Earth. For 3 decades, we have been preparing, reverse-engineered their technology. We built weapons they don't know we have. We established hidden bases throughout our solar system. And we made contact with other species. Races that have suffered under collective rule and have been waiting for someone to light the spark of rebellion. The council members stared in shock at the images rotating before them. Weapons platforms, fighter craft, and massive cannons that could theoretically punch through the shields of the alien vessels. It was an arsenal that should have been impossible for humanity to build. Why weren't we told? Chancellor Okafor demanded. Why keep this secret from the world's leaders? Because the collective has spies everywhere, Yuna replied. They have agents on dozens of worlds, gathering intelligence. If they had known what we were building, they would have come sooner with greater force. Secrecy was our only advantage. President Volkov leaned forward, her hands pressed flat against the table. Can we win? I don't know, Yuna answered honestly. Our simulations suggest we have a 40% chance of defeating their fleet. But even if we win this battle, the collective will send more ships. This fight won't end here. Then what do you propose? Elena asked. Yuna's expression hardened. I propose we send them a message. Not with words, but with actions. I propose we show them that humanity does not kneel. That we would rather die fighting than live as slaves. And I propose we inspire every other oppressed species in this galaxy to do the same. The council voted. It took less than 5 minutes. The decision was unanimous. They would craft their response, and it would be delivered not through diplomatic channels, but through every broadcast system Earth, ensuring the entire planet heard it simultaneously. President Alina Volkov stood before the cameras. Behind her stood representatives from every nation, united for the first time in human history. The transmission was sent on all frequencies, directed at the alien fleet hanging in orbit above their world. Overlord Cassix of the Sovereign Collective, Elena began, her voice steady and clear. We have received your demands. We have considered your threats, and we have reached our decision. She paused, letting the moment stretch out. Our answer is no. The word echoed across the planet and out into space. On every screen and every language, the same simple refusal. No tribute. No surrender. No slavery. In orbit, aboard the flagship of the collective fleet, Overlord Cassix stared at his monitors in disbelief. In 23,000 years of expansion, only twice had a species refused their terms. Both times, those species had been reduced to ashes as examples to others. His initial confusion gave way to cold rage. Prepare the cleansing protocols, he ordered his officers. These primitives have chosen extinction. We will grant them their wish. But as his weapon systems began to charge, alarms started screaming throughout the ship. His sensors were detecting energy signatures appearing all around them. Weapons platforms emerging from stealth. Fighter craft launching from hidden bases. And, most impossibly, massive cannons rising from beneath the lunar surface. Their barrels glowing with power as they locked onto his fleet, the humans had been preparing. They had been waiting. And now they were ready to fight. The battle for Earth was about to begin. The reckoning, the first shots came from the lunar cannons. Beams of concentrated energy, brighter than the sun, lanced across the void and struck the shields of the collective's vessels. The impact sent ripples of light cascading across their defensive barriers, but the shields held. Overlord Cassix allowed himself a moment of relief. The primitives had weapons, yes, but nothing that could threaten his fleet. Then the second volley hit. This time, the beam struck in perfect synchronization, all targeting the same shield point on the lead vessel. The concentrated fire created a feedback loop in the shield generators, and for just a fraction of a second, a gap opened. It was enough. Human fighter craft, small and fast, poured through the opening like angry hornets. They were piloted by men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Flying machines built from stolen technology and human innovation, Dock Commander Marcus Webb led the first squadron. His fighter was barely 20 meters long, a fraction of the size of the smallest collective vessel. But it moved with an agility that the massive alien ships could never match. He had been a test pilot for the secret program, flying prototypes that sometimes exploded on launch. He had lost friends, good people who had died to make this moment possible. Now he flew their names painted on his hull, a reminder of what they were fighting for. All wings, this is Hawk Leader, Marcus transmitted to his squadron. Target their sensor arrays. Blind them before they can coordinate their fire. The fighters dove and weaved through the gaps in the collective's defensive formation. Their weapons were small, designed more for precision than raw power, but they didn't need to destroy the massive ships. They just needed to disrupt them. Explosions blossomed across the hulls of the alien vessels as missile after missile found their targets. Communication dishes, scanner nodes, and weapon tracking systems disappeared in clouds of superheated metal. On Earth, Director Unipark stood in the command center, watching the battle unfold on dozens of screens simultaneously. She had spent 30 years preparing for this, 30 years lying to friends and family about what she really did, 30 years carrying the weight of humanity's survival on her shoulders. Now, she watched as her plans came to life, as the weapons and tactics her team had developed were put to the ultimate test. Director, we're receiving transmissions from the outer system, an officer reported. The volunteers are in position. Una nodded. The volunteers were colonists who had been living in secret bases throughout the solar system for the past decade. They had given up comfortable lives on Earth to man remote outposts, raising families in hidden bunkers on asteroids and moons, all for this moment. Now their installations were coming online, adding their firepower to the defense of their homeworld. Aboard the collective flagship, Overlord Cassix struggled to understand what was happening. His tactical displays were filled with error messages as sensor after sensor went offline. His officers shouted reports of damage and casualties. Ships that should have been invincible were being harassed by tiny craft that moved too quickly to track effectively. It was impossible. These humans were supposed to be primitives, barely capable of reaching their own moon. How did they develop this technology? He demanded of his science officer, a reptilian creature named Threx, who had served the collective for over a century. Sir, I'm detecting energy signatures that match our own systems, Threx replied, his claws clicking nervously against his console. They must have captured one of our survey probes. They reverse engineered it. Cassix felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear. If the humans could steal and adapt collective technology in just 3 decades, what else were they capable of? He made a decision. Signal the fleet. Retreat to Formation Delta. Charge the planet crackers. We end this now. The planet crackers were weapons of last resort. Massive missiles capable of penetrating deep into a world's crust and detonating with enough force to trigger geological catastrophe. They had been used only twice in the collective's history, both times to make examples of rebellious species. Cassix had hoped to avoid their use on Earth, as the planet itself was valuable. But the humans had left him no choice. Sarah Chun saw the missiles launch on her displays. She had studied collective weapons for years and recognized them immediately. Director, she called out to Yuna, trying to keep the panic from her voice. They've launched planet crackers. 6 missiles, all targeted at major tectonic fault lines. If those detonate, they'll trigger earthquakes and volcanic eruptions across the globe. Yuna's face remained calm, though her knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of her console. Activate the orbital interceptors. All of them, hidden satellites throughout Earth's orbit, suddenly came to life. They had been positioned over the past decade, disguised as weather monitoring systems and communication relays. Now they revealed their true purpose. Each satellite deployed a network of high-speed kinetic projectiles, essentially hypersonic bullets fired with pinpoint accuracy. The planet cracker missiles were fast, but the interceptors were faster. One by one, the missiles were destroyed before they could reach the atmosphere, detonating harmlessly in the vacuum of space. KAS-6 watched in mounting horror as his ultimate weapons were neutralized. How? He whispered. How did they know? The answer came in the form of a new transmission, broadcast on frequencies the collective had believed were secure. A face appeared on every screen in Cassix's fleet. It was a young man, perhaps 25 years old, with bronze skin and determined eyes. He wore the uniform of the Human Defense Forces, but with insignia that identified him as belonging to intelligence operations. Overlord Cassix, the young man said. My name is Lieutenant Jin Park. For the past 8 years, I have been living among your people, disguised as a servant in your intelligence headquarters. I know every weapon you have, every tactic you use, every weakness in your systems, and I am not alone. We have agents embedded throughout your empire, on dozens of worlds, in hundreds of installations. We have been learning from you, and now we are going to teach you something in return. The transmission cut to show images from across the galaxy. On world after world, species that had been conquered by the collective were rising up. Factories were sabotaging production lines. Military units were refusing orders. Entire planets were declaring independence. The carefully maintained order of the Sarin Collective was collapsing, and it had all been coordinated to happen at this exact moment. Director Una Park had not spent 30 years preparing to defend Earth alone. She had spent 30 years building a network of resistance across the entire galaxy, waiting for the right moment to activate it. The message of humanity's refusal had been that signal, and now thousands of worlds were following their example. Cassix understood then that he had lost. Not just this battle, but the war. The collective's power had always been based on the belief that resistance was futile, that they were too strong to be challenged. The humans had shattered that belief. They had shown that the collective could be fought, could be beaten, and in doing so had inspired countless others to try. Order the fleet to withdraw, Cassix said quietly. We're leaving the system. His officers stared at him in shock. Sir, we still outnumber them. We can still— No, Kasich interrupted. We cannot win here. The longer we stay, the more ships we lose, the more our weakness is revealed. We withdraw now and regroup. Perhaps we can salvage something from this disaster. The collective fleet began to retreat, their massive vessels turning away from Earth and activating their faster-than-light drives. As they disappeared one by one, humanity watched in stunned silence. They had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that had ruled the galaxy for 23,000 years. They had won. On the lunar surface, Marcus Webb landed his fighter at the hidden base he had launched from. His hands were shaking as he removed his helmet. He had expected to die today, expected to sacrifice himself in a last desperate attempt to save his world. Instead, he was alive and Earth was safe. In Geneva, President Elena Volkov addressed the world once more. Today, humanity proved something important. We proved that freedom is not given. It is taken. We proved that courage matters more than technology. We proved that united, we can face any threat. But we also proved something to the galaxy. We proved that tyranny can be defeated. The celebration lasted for days. Cities around the world erupted in spontaneous parties. People danced in the streets, strangers embraced, and for a brief moment, all of humanity's divisions seemed to disappear in the face of their shared victory. But director Una Park did not celebrate. She sat in her office, reading reports from across the galaxy. The collective was in chaos, their empire fragmenting as world after world declared independence. A new era was beginning, one where humanity would play a leading role. There would be challenges ahead, diplomatic complexities, and new conflicts to navigate. But for the first time in galactic history, there was hope. Sarah Chun found Una late that night, still working at her desk. Director, you should rest. We won. Una looked up and smiled, a rare expression for her. We did, didn't we? 30 years of preparation, 30 years of sacrifice, and it actually worked. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now? Una leaned back in her chair. Now we help rebuild. The species that are breaking free from the collective will need support, guidance, protection. We have the technology, the weapons, and most importantly, we have the experience of standing up to tyranny. We can teach others how to do the same, and the collective, they'll try to reclaim what they've lost, Una said. But they'll never be what they were. We broke their image of invincibility. That was the real victory today. Every conquered species in the galaxy now knows that the collective can be beaten. Some will negotiate for better terms. Others will fight for complete freedom. But none of them will ever simply accept subjugation again. Across the solar system, the hidden bases and installations began to emerge from secrecy. Families who had lived in isolation for years finally contacted their relatives on Earth, children who had grown up on distant asteroids, prepared to visit the homeworld they had only seen in pictures. The secret war was over, and a new age of openness was beginning. Lieutenant Jin Park, the young intelligence officer who had spent 8 years undercover in the heart of the collective's empire, was finally coming home. His ship approached Earth, and he looked down at the blue and white planet with tears in his eyes. He had missed birthdays, weddings, and funerals. He had lived every day knowing that if his cover was blown, he would be executed. But it had been worth it. Every sacrifice had been worth it. On a distant world, on the edge of what had been collective space, a child asked her mother about the images they had seen on their screens. Images of a small blue planet that had said no to the greatest power in the galaxy and won. Will they come help us too? The child asked. Her mother held her close and looked up at the stars. I think my dear, I think they will. And in the command center in Colorado, Director Una Park typed a single message that would be sent to every world that had declared independence. It was simple, direct, and carried the weight of humanity's commitment to the future. You are not alone. We stand with you. The age of the sovereign collective was ending. The age of freedom was just beginning. And humanity, the species that had refused to kneel, would help light the way forward for all who dare to dream of liberty.